Hi everybody, for this week's project I'm going to show you how to make this disgusting and nasty looking forest of flesh. Now for this project I used the same techniques that I used for the last two basis tutorials that I did here on Dark Matter Workshop. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe, please like, you know what to do, and welcome to the workshop. We are going to start by taking a look at the tools and the materials list for the flesh base. I'm going to start by making a texture. For this I used a plastic bag and a hot air gun. We cut the texture to size to make it a little bit easier to use. And this is a close-up of the texture, as you can see, quite nice indeed. Let's go to the next step. We're going to provide some texture to the base. And this is done by air drying clay. Give the clay a good knead and then apply it to the MDF base, and then I use a clay roller to spread out the clay. Make sure it's nice and flat, and then we can press in the texture. I use the clay roller again to give it a little bit more pressure so the texture really goes in deep into the clay. Gently pull the texturing tool from the clay and continue this process until you are happy with the results. To enhance the design a little bit more, I use the sculpting tool to press in some of the lines between the nuts that were formed, just all over the base. And then time for the final texture. I'm going to apply some PVA glue. On top of that, a bit of super glue and mix these up. This is the same technique I used for the base tutorial. After applying this texture, it's time to set the base aside and let it dry thoroughly. And then it's time to get on with the trees. I cut out a base out of 1mm thick styrene with the scissors. Now to make the trees I'm going to use thin metal wire. I cut a piece off by about 50 centimeters or 20 inch. I fold it over a couple of times. So I end up with a bunch of metal pieces measuring about 4 inch or 10 centimeters. And then I use pliers to make the trunk of the tree. These bottom pieces will be used to glue the tree to the base. And then it's time to make some branches. Cut them to size, and again we bend these to give a bit of strength. And then we can glue the tree to the base with a bit of super glue. And we're going to start by making the texture to represent the bark. I'm going to use a mixture of sawdust and wallpaper glue. About 90:10 ratio. We're going to mix in a bunch of water until we reach a cottage cheese-like consistency. Then we're going to use our fingers to model this paste around the metal wire. Then with the sculpting tool we add a bit of trunk-like texture, a bit of lining. Then we set these aside to dry. And then finally our final texture is again the PVA mixture with the super glue. And we apply this texture where we want. At the base and on the tree. Now that the building stage for the trees is done, it's time to start painting the base. We're going to lay down a primer. I used Vallejo gray primer all over the model, let it dry thoroughly. Then for our first color, I'm going to use a purple ink, which I'm going to spray on with the airbrush. I'm going to concentrate this color on the knots in the pattern and the connections between. Second color is black, again concentrated on the knots. And then the final is a blood red ink by Sennelier. The first base coats are almost done. I reapply the purple to tame the brightness of the red. And then our second big stage, the wash stage, we're gonna start by adding black all over the knots and the connections between. And then a mixture of black wash and purple ink, about 50-50, all around the places where I added the first black wash. Then on the red parts, a mixture of fleshwash by Games Workshop and purple ink. Let it dry thoroughly and then we can add our first highlight. A dry brush with dead flesh. Now this is actually an airbrush color, so it's a bit more difficult to apply, so I build it up gently. And then for the rest of the model I apply a dry brush of Ivory. And then it's time to start reapplying the inks and washes again. Again with the blood red at the appropriate places that we used before. Then a bit of blue ink by Games Workshop. Not on the entire model, just a few spots here and there to add in a bit more color. Then I re-highlight, and this time 50% dead flesh and 50% ivory. Again on the knots and the lines between. Just gently build up the colors. Then after drying time, I apply a layer of flesh shade all over the highlight. And then a bit of sepia by Sennelier. Now all these inks by Sennelier are actually satin, so they give a bit of sheen, which works perfectly on this flesh base. Then a little bit of green wash, again to add little spots of color, to add little bits of variation, just gently here and there. Another layer of blood red ink at the appropriate places. And finally a highlight again with dead flesh and ivory, but now just gently in the knots to bring out the texture. And that's the result. Time to go paint some trees. This one is even easier. We're going to start by lay down a bit of sepia and a bit of walnut brown by Sennelier all over the trunk. And then our second layer is the blood red ink, but this is a little bit diluted with water. We apply this layer all over the fleshy parts of the tree and the base. After drying, we hit the trees with a layer of light flesh dry brushing just all over the model. And then we go at it again with the inks. Blood red ink, this time pure, undiluted, on the base and on the trees where the fleshy bits are. And then a mixture of the red ink and the purple to add a little bit of depth. And that's about it for this project, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're disgusted. I hope you're inspired. I hope you liked what you saw. Please consider subscribing, liking this video. Dark Matter Workshop now has an Instagram page where I regularly post WIP pictures of projects. Please consider to go and check it out. Once again, thank you all very much for watching. Next week is going to be something entirely different for this channel. We're going to make a diorama. Please stick around. I hope to see you there. Bye.